Cradle, The Rise of the Chosen, Chapter 23, Part 1. Then the structure shook, and it sounded like the earth was rumbling. Takuma instinctively grabbed his wife's hand and brought her to his chest. For some reason, he looked up at the pockboard ceiling and guessed it was, whatever it was coming from the greater island city which they were technically beneath. Then Takuma looked out the window and only saw helicopters, electric helicopters, scattering toward the mainland in all directions. Then the siren started blaring, and there was just a peak of black smoke falling from the window line. Prishno Almaadu, Lawrence. The damn Lawrence bastards, Pierce exclaimed. And he stood up from his hunched-over position and scurried around the table and headed for the doors behind the king and queen. The two followed the governor down the swanky yet panicked hallway. The security detail almost embraced the prime governor, but he pushed past them and headed further up the plush carpeting, and Takuma and Gianoa followed him all the way to the marble and glass area where the sleek high-speed elevators were located. They just made it on with Pierce before the doors closed on them. Inside the elevator, it was mirrored and clean smelling. Takuma looked into his eyes to see if they were acting funny, but they looked as normal as Itariyama could. Di Luki Manu Aoi. What are you going to do? Gino asked the governor. Kopurti Ayo Hijim. I gotta see what the hell's happening first, he answered. Ma'ancha'ani. Take this as a sign, Gianoa said. The governor gave her a hard look for a couple of moments and then softened his eyes and clasped his hands in thought. He nodded at her, finally, took a deep breath and leaned against the mirror with his right hand, and just then the doors beeped and the elevator stopped, giving them all a floating feeling as the door slid smoothly open. Takuma quickly took it all in. There were fires on the meat of some of the buildings. They'd probably been hit with air-to-ground missiles, and the helicopters of Trent were already on top of some of the fires. In total, there only had to be about 6 buildings and the blocks around it on fire, with some rubble falling to street level. He quickly looked over to the bay where he saw a large fleet of warships and a few circling aircraft. He looked for his own kingdom's fleet in the dark blue bay and in the gray sky, but they hadn't arrived yet. Ni'ituli oil pi'entul. We need to get you out of here, Takuma said to Pierce. Then he noticed Pierce was on his screen, tuned into a conversation. For a moment, they waited while the sirens and echoes of hollering cascaded around them. Pierce looked at Takuma and nodded and then put down his screen. Ti'inu, Kanta, Lawrence, Ui, Uitazin. The president of Lawrence is meeting us back in the meeting room, Pierce explained. Jut, right now. They made their way to the high-speed elevator again and saw the security detail now equipped with matte black semi-autos and wearing nano vests that deflected bullets nearly perfectly and protected them also from gas grenades by emitting anti-aerosol in the vicinity. Takuma turned to talk to his wife, but she shook her head, and he guessed that it was because she wanted the governor off his toes as much as possible so that he could be swayed eventually. The elevator ride down was intense and solemn. Takuma looked at himself and his wife in the mirrors and knew nothing would happen to her, but he didn't want her here in the least. She deserved better, he thought candidly. The walk back down the luxurious hallway was all a blur. Foreign military personnel were crowded around throughout, and there was tension on either side as two sides faced each other. Takuma assessed them and could tell that one wrong move and there'd be bullet holes all in this hallway. In the meeting room, a tall, tanned, copper-skinned man with short black hair and a gray tailored suit stood and immediately offered his hand across the table. Pierce was sweating on his bald head now, and he shook his head ever so slightly before shaking hands with the opposing president. Kik Kumal, Mua, have a seat, President. Pierce offered, and all around the table the people sat. Not all, Kalku, more. Why are you bombing my people? President Pierce asked directly and looked straight into the bird-like eyes of the president. The president of Lawrence cleared his throat and straightened his collar with a snap of his wrist and plainly said, Jiku ta'al, no gu'un ma'an. Why did you bring the muscle? He asked, and nodded at Gianoa and Takuma. Takuma gave him a cold look. He ma'ak. Don't give me that crap, Pierce exploded. Loki, io, hajim, ba'anu. You know they are close allies. The president stood up quickly and pointed and pierced his face. Jakami, higua, tikuli, ektu, pa'ani, ua, dinta. They defy the 6 gods, and you do too by associating with them, the president exclaimed. Monit niti lukal ayo re ziam ziki tekuli. You do not bomb my people over issues with gods, Pierce said, and stood up and leaned over his part of the dark wood table to face the president closer. Takuma looked at the men for only a moment and then took his attention back out of the window to see if his own royal fleet had arrived yet, and they had not, or at least not apparently. He sighed and resolved to let this play out as far as it needed to. The men stared off for a while and both sat down at the same time, still looking in their opponent's eyes. The president cleared his throat and pressed the front of his suit. Jinnich, Vinkul, Di Lu, Tekuli, Sarji, Ho Balami. Listen, just accept our gods as a nation, and this will all go away, the president laid out. Pierce shot Takuma an honest look. Takuma cleared his throat and knew how to enter. Gianoa smirked in support. Ka'anti, Muli'iku, Ula, Da'ama, Ni'iti, Huajami. You and your fleet will leave now or be annihilated, Takuma said coldly and evenly, looking dead in the president's eyes. The president had a tinge of hesitation in his face, but kept somewhat stony.